With the money from our tickets, Ian and I set off to find a place to stay. I knew better than to inquire in the fancy areas. We could probably get more money from Uncle Patrick if we had to, but I didn't want to give Elsa and her daughters the satisfaction of seeing us beg. The street sign across from the pier said West Street. I grabbed Maureen's hand and started off. Are we walking all the way back to Uncle Patrick's? Maureen asked. We're not going to Uncle Patrick's. Maureen smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I was trying to get my bearings. I knew that the Hudson River was on the west side of the city, and we needed to be on the east side, near the East River. I also knew we had to head down through the streets with lower numbers, and that the street numbers got lower as they went south. I turned right at the next corner. Do you know where you're going? Maureen asked. Of course. The next street will be 9th Street, I said, feeling smug. When we reached the corner, Maureen said, That's a funny way to spell 9th. It was Christopher Street. It's all right, I said. The next street was Barrow, then Morton. I decided to start walking across town and got us into a maze of narrow streets, not a numbered one among them. Maureen was keeping up a steady stream of questions, such as how did I know we were going the right way, and where were we going anyway? I was just about to admit we were lost when we stumbled upon West Houston Street. I knew that name. I had crossed East Houston on the way to Mr. Moscovich's shop. It was the first street below the numbered streets on the east side. Now all I needed to do was follow it until I came to something I recognized. I stepped out with confidence at last. This looks like a nice neighborhood, Maureen said. Why don't we find a place to stay here? I want to be close to the place where they make roses. We'll look on Broome Street. We can afford the rent there. Are we both going to work now? Maureen asked. I'm not afraid, you know. I'm not a ninny like Hildegard and Trudy. No, I promised Ma you'd stay in school. You promised her we'd go to Uncle Patrick's too. I don't see that happening. All right, maybe you can work on the flowers at night at home. Maybe I could work during the day and do my studies at night at home. We'll see, I said. I knew it was senseless to argue with her. Better to humour her until I couldn't hide the truth any longer. She was going to school if I had to drag her there every morning and chain her to a school desk. I'd not have her grown up ignorant. I knew one thing. To make your way in this country, you needed to be smart. Just as I was starting to worry about getting lost again, we came to the Bowery. We're almost there, I said, turning the corner and walking faster. Maureen was enchanted by it all. So many people. Did you ever see so many people in one place? The usual crush of pushcarts and peddler wagons were starting to clog up the street. When we turned onto Broome Street, I spotted a room for rent sign about halfway down the first block. We went inside and inquired, but the owner said he wanted to rent to a man, not 2 girls. I thought that was odd, but after 3 more landlords telling us the same thing, I was beginning to get discouraged. Maybe we should start asking people in the street if they want to rent out their closet, Maureen said. I'm tired and hungry, Rose. Can't we stop to eat? There were some peddler wagons on West Broadway, so we stopped to buy a loaf of black bread. Maureen ripped herself off a huge hunk, but I took the piece from her and broke it in 2. Don't be greedy, I said, keeping half for myself. This has to last us a while. After walking 2 more blocks, Maureen spotted a sign on a side street named Sullivan, but we couldn't read it until we got up close. Room for rent. See Garoff, 2nd floor, rear. Let me do the talking, I said, as we ran up the stairs. There were only 2 apartments on the 2nd floor. An odd-looking man opened the rear door when I knocked. He reminded me of the immigrants at Ellis Island with his black hat and threadbare black suit. He gave me a puzzled look. You want something? You have a room to rent? I asked. The man said nothing, just looked at me in an odd way. There was a sign outside, I said. Room to rent. Are you Mr. Garoff? I was looking for a young man, Jewish. We wouldn't be any trouble, I said. We're quiet and we can take care of ourselves. Mr. Garoff shook his head. I already have my daughter to look after. I don't need more girls. Maureen pushed in front of me. My sister told you, we don't need looking after. We're perfectly able to fend for ourselves. We just need a place to stay. Mr. Garoff sighed. Already I have 1 girl with a big mouth, and now this. I heard Maureen taking a breath as if she were about to say something else, so I pulled her behind me before she could open her mouth. I gave Mr. Garoff my most charming smile. My sister didn't mean anything, sir. Could we perhaps meet your daughter? I thought if she were our age, she might be on our side. She won't be home until after 7. You come back then and we talk about this. 7? It would be dark by then, and the little warmth the sun was giving us now would be gone. If he decided then that we couldn't stay, we'd be out in the cold for the night. I had to convince him. Please, Mr. Garoff, we need a place to stay tonight. We'll pay for the one night, and if you want us to leave tomorrow, we'll go. Just please, let us sleep here tonight. It's freezing outside. He rubbed his beard and scowled at Maureen. I apologize for my outburst, sir, Maureen said, knowing she had put us in this predicament. I'm mostly very quiet. I bit my lip to keep from laughing. Maureen wasn't accustomed to apologies. Mr. Garoff sighed. All right, come. I show you the room. You pay just for one night. Then we see if you stay after that. Maybe not. He raised his eyebrows at Maureen, who ducked her head meekly and followed us into the apartment. We have one extra room, and when my wife and other daughters come from Russia, you leave, if you are still here then. There was one square room, with a wood stove and a table. The room itself was the same shape as the main room in Uncle Patrick's, only much smaller, and there was no parlour leading into it. I could see a dark bedroom off the back of the room, and a cot in the main room looked like someone slept there too. Mr. Garoff pulled back a curtain that led into a tiny room with no furniture. Maureen had joked about living in a closet, but it appeared that was exactly the space Mr. Garoff had for rent. It's not large, he said, as if we were blind. I countered with, It's fine, before Maureen could put in her 2 cents worth. Mr. Garoff nodded. Make yourselves comfortable. Tonight, after you meet my daughter Gosela, we'll see. Thank you, I said. Oh, and one other thing. No food. No food, Maureen cried. We can't eat in our own room. Mr. Garoff scowled. You eat your own food. You don't eat mine. No food goes with price of room. Oh, Maureen said. That's fine. We'll buy our own food. Mr. Garoff shrugged. Just so we understand each other. I closed our curtain and plumped the feather bed against the wall to give us a place to sit. We wouldn't need chairs even if there was room for them, which there wasn't. The stove in the next room sent its warmth directly into our room, and the one tiny window seemed to be sealed tight, so there were no drafts on the floor. Maureen and I sat next to each other on the bed. We have our own place in America, she whispered. It's not much, but it's ours. For tonight, I reminded her. And now we have to work on our stems. Mr. Moskovitz will be angry at me for not bringing them back today. I need to take them back finished tomorrow. We bent our heads close to the fading light from the window. It gets dark too early now. Tomorrow, I'll buy a candle. Mr. Garoff must have heard us, for he knocked on the frame of the door. If you need light, I have extra oil lamp. It could be part of the rent. I pulled back the curtain and took the lighted lamp. Thank you. Don't burn midnight oil, he said. I am not a wealthy man. I set the lamp on the floor, and its light filled the whole room. Now it was much easier to see what we were doing. We took a short break to have a little more bread for our supper, then went back to work. It wasn't long before we had quite a pile of finished stems between us. I started out checking every one that Maureen made, but when I found that hers were every bit as good as mine, I stopped checking and just kept working. What are you going to tell Ma, Rose? Why should I tell her anything? You have to, when you write to her. I'm not going to write until I have something good to say. But having a place is good, Maureen protested. Besides, you promised to write every day. Just like I promised to go to Uncle Patrick's, I said, making a joke of it. But deep inside, it hurt me to be breaking a promise to my own mother. We heard someone come in, and a young woman's voice joined Mr. Garoff's low, grumbly one. That must be his daughter, Maureen whispered. Should we go out and meet her? I don't know. Maybe we should wait till we're invited. I'd never lived in another person's house, except for Uncle Patrick's, and that didn't count because it was family. If we hadn't been welcome with our own relatives, how would it be with strangers? I wondered why Mr. Garoff wanted to talk over our staying here with his daughter. Surely he would be the one to make the decision. My thoughts were interrupted by Gosella calling out near our door curtain. Hello? Would you like to join us for some tea? Maureen and I scrambled to our feet. I smoothed down my hair before we went out. Gosella was pouring tea into a glass. Glass of tea, Papa? He nodded, and she placed the glass in front of him and poured some for us. She had strong features with beautiful large brown eyes. Her dark hair was pulled back and knotted at the nape of her neck. She looked up. Come sit. I'm Gussie. Papa has told me you want to rent our room, but he didn't tell me your names. I quickly introduced us as we took our places at the table, realizing that Mr. Garoff had never asked us who we were. Nolan, Gussie said. You're from Ireland, no? She sounded American, with none of the heavy accent of her father. I nodded. From Limerick. We've not been here very long. There aren't many Irish in this neighbourhood. Not more than 1 or 2 Irish girls at work that I can think of. Gussie took a seat next to her father. I wasn't going to say anything about our situation, but Maureen blurted out about Da having to go back with Joseph and how we stayed with Uncle Patrick, but Ma didn't like it here and went back. She talked so fast I didn't get a chance to kick her under the table before she'd gone through our whole life story. It's brave of you to stay here on your own, Gussie said. We have work, Maureen said, making parts of flowers. Before I could stop her, she jumped up and brought one of our stems from the room. Gussie turned it over in her fingers. Where do you do this? The shop is over on Christie Street, I said, but Mr. Moskovitz lets me take work home. Don't worry, we won't make a mess. We're very careful. Gosella is a seamstress, Mr. Garoff said. She has good job at Shirtwaist Factory on Washington Square. Is that where they make those pretty Gibson girl blouses? Maureen asked. It's one of the places, Gussie said, probably the largest. Our company takes up the top 3 floors of the building. Over 400 people work there. I couldn't imagine working in a place that large. No wonder Gussie seemed so sophisticated. Her job made ours seem childish. Still, I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to apply for a job in a big factory, even if they'd take me. Gussie got up to pour more tea into our glasses, serving her father first. This tea not usual, Mr. Garoff said. It's very good, I said, thinking he meant this was something special served in our honor. Mr. Garoff leaned toward me. I mean you not usually drink our tea. You get your own tea. Gussie laughed. Oh, Papa, a few extra tea leaves won't put us into the poorhouse. Why rent out room if it costs money instead of bringing money? He said. We can buy our own tea, Maureen said. We like Irish tea anyway. Do you use one of those machines for your sewing? I asked, hoping to distract them from Maureen's rudeness. Gussie slipped back into her place at the table. Yes, it makes the work go much faster. Our mother is a seamstress, I said, but she does everything by hand. Thinking that made her sound backward, I added, she makes dresses for our fancy shop in Limerick. She must be very patient, Gussie said. I thought about that. Patient was not a word I'd use to describe Ma, but I let it go. We managed an awkward conversation until our glasses were empty. Gussie was friendly enough, but she seemed to regard us with curiosity, and her father's glares made it clear that he wasn't pleased to have us as renters. Finally, we excused ourselves to go back to work. I thanked Gussie for the tea, and she said, I hope you'll enjoy living here. I smiled at Maureen. That meant that some sort of decision had been made over our little tea party. We had found a place to stay, at least until the rest of the Garoff family came over from Russia. I relit the lamp, and Maureen and I counted up the stems in bunches of 10. For all our hard work, we had only managed to make 1,247 stems. We worked another hour, but when Mr. Garoff made a comment purposely loud enough for us to hear about the cost of lamp oil, we extinguished the light and went to bed. We'll get up at dawn, I whispered to Maureen. Maybe we can finish the rest so I can take them back in the morning. Is the shop open on Sunday? I forgot what day it was. We just need to have them ready on Monday then. Sunday morning, Gussie told us where to find a Catholic church. I figured lying to Ma about staying at Uncle Patrick's was bad enough, The very least I could do was get myself and Maureen to Mass. We started right in on the stems when we got home, but we barely had all 3,000 stems bundled up and ready by bedtime that night. My fingers are sore from bending the wire, Maureen complained. How are we going to do this day after day? I looked at the red stripes on my own fingers. Maybe we'll get calluses, I said. It must get easier. Nobody would do this job if it stayed so painful. They would if they wanted to eat, Maureen said. Before I could come up with an encouraging thought, she had fallen asleep, sitting up on the feather bed, leaning against the wall. 18. First thing Monday morning, I headed for Mr. Moscovitz's shop with the finished stems. Maureen had whined about going along with me, but I didn't want her to cause problems. A dusting of snow had fallen during the night, making the sidewalks slippery as I walked along. The girls were just settling in at the tables when I got there. Mr. Moscovitz looked up. Ah, so the little thief has returned. I handed him the bundle of stems. I didn't steal them. It just took longer than I expected to do them. He opened the bundle, dumped the stems on the table, and started tossing some of them aside. What are you doing? I asked. I'm throwing out the bad ones, he said. You don't expect me to pay for stems I can't use, do you? If you show me what's wrong with them, I'll fix them. Mr. Moscovitz kept adding to the discard pile. I'm running a business here, not a school. I picked up one of the rejected stems and looked it over, but I couldn't see a thing wrong with it. I remembered what Mr. Moscovitz had said about me being charged for the materials on the stems I had ruined. I could see the money for our hard work slipping away with each stem he rejected. Please, Mr. Moscovitz, I said quietly. I really need the work now. My mother and younger sister have gone back to Ireland. I have to earn the money to take care of me and my sister Maureen. Mr. Moscovitz raised his eyebrows at this remark, but said nothing. Laughter came from the workers' table. I had spoken so quietly to Mr. Moscovitz, I was sure they couldn't have heard me. Tessa had just said something to the others and looked at me with a smirk on her face. How had I ever thought she might be a friend? Wasn't there anyone I could trust in this country? Mr. Moscovitz shoved the stems aside. It will take too long to sort these out now. You come back tonight after the shop closes, and I'll give you the pay you deserve. Not a cent less or more. What time is that? I asked, remembering that I had left early the day I worked here. Come at 8, he said. I left the shop feeling helpless. I had hoped to go home with money in my pocket. Now I knew Mr. Moscovitz could pay me as little as he pleased, and I had no way to fight it. The thought occurred to me that I might be better off working at the shop again instead of taking work home. That way there would be witnesses to what I had produced, although I couldn't see any of the other girls sticking up for me if I got into a dispute with Mr. Moscovitz. As far as they were concerned, I was an outsider and not worth risking their jobs over. When I got home, Maureen and I went out to buy tea and a pot to steep it in. They were both more expensive than I'd expected, but Mr. Gareth had made it clear that he wouldn't be sharing his tea with us, so I had no choice. I had wanted to buy a knife for cutting bread, but decided that was a luxury we couldn't afford until I knew how much money we'd be making on a regular basis. Our small loaf was almost gone. I figured we might be able to get one more meal out of it, then we'd have to buy another. At least we had a room that was warm and dry, and that was something to be thankful for. I arrived at the shop that night just as the girls were leaving. Tessa came over to me. You're a fool to come back, she said. That old goat won't give you a penny. And she turned and ran to catch up to the others. When I went into the shop, Mr. Moscovitz was hunched over his ledger book at the table. He barely glanced at me. Sit down and wait. I'm busy. I took a seat at the far end of the table. Two of the older women were wrapping themselves up in scarves and talking in Russian or Polish, I couldn't tell which. One of them made a clucking sound with her tongue and shook her head as they shuffled by me on their way to the door. They were still angry at me for taking work home. Well, so be it. When the door shut behind the two women, Mr. Moscovitz closed his ledger and stood up, stretching his back. The workday is over. Now it's time to relax, no? Here, let me take your coat. He folded it, placed it carefully on the table, and smiled at me. I felt a sense of relief. I smiled back at him. He went over to the stove and poured 2 glasses of tea. He set one in front of me, then unwrapped a paper and pulled out 2 small pastries. This is the time of day I treat myself, he said. He ripped the paper into 2 plates and shoved one over next to my tea. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his hand over his big belly. No need to rush, right? No one will worry if you're not home right away. Well, there's my sister. I was starting to feel uneasy. He pulled a piece of sugar candy from his pocket and set it on the table. You'll give this to your sister when you get home. Mr. Moskovitz sipped his tea, watching me. You know, I see many girls who come here for work. Many girls. Most don't have the good sense God gave them. But every now and then, I see a special girl. One like you, Rose. I could feel myself blushing. Mr. Moskovitz took a big bite of pastry, spilling sugar on his vest and tie, then talked with his mouth full. I'm going to expand this shop, Rose, and I'll need someone to manage it for me. Of course, this won't happen right away, but maybe in another month or so, I'll need someone with a good head on her shoulders. Was he offering me the job? I couldn't tell. Why would he pick me over someone like Tessa? I took a sip of tea, but could barely swallow. The job will pay well, he continued, leaning toward me. Very well. It could put your worries about caring for your sister to rest. His face was so close to mine, I could see the sparkles of sugar on his lower lip and in his beard. Then suddenly, he grabbed my shoulders and pulled me to my feet. Before I knew what was happening, he had me pressed close to his chest and was kissing me hard on the mouth. I struggled to get away, but he held both of my hands firmly behind my back. He slammed me down backward on the table, and I heard the glasses hit the floor and shatter. I managed to turn my face away from him and scream, but nobody came. Who would hear? Be smart, he shouted. Think of your sister. You don't want her to starve, do you? All I knew at that moment was I would rather have Maureen and me cold in the ground than have this beast touch me. As he moved in to kiss me again, I clamped my teeth down on his nose. He let out a bellow and reeled back, knocking over several chairs and falling to the floor. I dove for the door and tried to open the latch, but my fingers wouldn't work right. All of a sudden, Mr. Moskovitz was on his feet and heading for me. I gave one hard yank, the door unlatched, and I burst outside. I ran through the front building and out onto the street. My mind was racing. I couldn't remember how to get back to the apartment. I reached the end of the block and didn't recognize the name of the street. Where was I? Had I run the wrong way? Was he following me? I looked back down the street. There was no sign of him. My knees went weak. I leaned back against a wall, breathing hard. The cold of the brick cut through my dress. My coat! I had left it at the shop. It was the middle of winter, and now I had no coat. I licked my lips and tasted sugar. I hadn't taken a single bite of my pastry. I remembered Mr. Moskovitz's sugar-coated lips and sank to my knees. I vomited up every bite of food I'd had all day. 19. I was half froze by the time I found our apartment. Gussie and Mr. Garoff were sitting at the table when I burst in. I ran past them into our little closet without saying a word. Maureen had been napping, but sat bolt upright when I flung myself down on the feather bed next to her. Rose, what happened to you? Nothing, I said, burying my face in the feather bed. It smelled like Ma and home. I wanted to wrap it around me like a cocoon and never come out again. I could feel Maureen's fingers poking at my bare shoulder. Rose, your sleeve is partly ripped off. What happened? I started to sob. That awful man had ruined my dress. Maureen gripped my shoulder now and tried to turn me over. Rose, tell me what's wrong. You're scaring me. Leave me alone, I wailed. I couldn't tell her what had happened. How could I have been so stupid? Ma was right. I couldn't take care of myself, much less a younger sister. I heard Maureen get up and leave. Then a few minutes later, she was next to me again, patting my back. I turned over and swatted her hand away. But when I looked up, it wasn't Maureen. It was Gussie. I'm sorry, I gasped. I thought you were my sister. Shh. Gussie put her finger to her lips. You don't have to say anything. I sent Maureen out with my father for a little while. There's not much privacy in these tight quarters, and I thought you could use a little time to yourself. Maureen was alone with Mr. Garoff. I sat up. No, I have to get my sister. I was all the way to the apartment door before Gussie caught my arm. Wait, are you afraid that my father will harm Maureen? Because if you are, I can assure you he's a gentle and honourable man. Gussie practically wrestled me over to the table and pushed me firmly into a chair. You're not running out into the cold with no coat on. If you don't want to tell me what's wrong, that's fine. But at least drink a glass of tea and try to calm down. I was shivering so hard I could hardly bring the glass to my lips. Gussie sat across the table from me and watched. It didn't take long before I started telling her about what happened. I told how Moskowitz hadn't paid me the money for the stems earlier in the day, and how he wanted me to go back after the shop closed to get my pay. You were foolish to go there alone at night, she said. I don't need you telling me that, I shouted. I'm sick and tired of everybody pointing out everything I do wrong. But my stupidity didn't give him the right to... I couldn't even say the words. What did he do, Rose? I started crying again. Did he hurt you? Did he... He kissed me, I cried, feeling the revulsion all over. Is that all? Is that all? He was a filthy, disgusting old man. It was terrible. I know. I didn't mean to belittle what happened. You're just lucky that's all he did. She gave me her handkerchief. I'm assuming you didn't get the money for your work tonight. I shook my head and blew my nose. Gussie banged her fist on the table, causing the glasses to clatter and me to jump like a nervous cat. It makes me furious. We fought so hard for our rights, but the owners of these shops don't care. They just do as they please and nobody stops them. What do you mean about fighting? I asked, wiping my nose. Gussie looked at me as if I had half a brain. The strikes, of course. Have you not heard about them? I was embarrassed to admit my ignorance. When I didn't answer, she came to her own conclusion. I forgot. The strikes were 2 years ago. You were in Ireland, weren't you? She rubbed her forehead. How strange. It seemed like such a revolution to us. I would have thought the whole world knew. You went out on strike? Yes, hundreds of us. And not just in New York either. We had girls go out in other cities like Rochester and Philadelphia. The police beat us and threw us in jail. Look here. She pulled back the sleeve of her blouse, revealing a large lump on her wrist. A policeman broke my arm with his nightstick and it never healed right. They wouldn't let me out of jail to see a doctor. You were in jail? She looked so fragile, I couldn't imagine her standing up to a policeman. Gussie nodded. Don't mention this around my father. It almost killed him to have his daughter in trouble with the law. This sort of thing just isn't done by women in the old country. Father thinks I should keep quiet, but when I see something wrong, I want to change it. Luckily, I'm not the only one who feels that way. I was beginning to understand what Gussie's father meant about having one big-mouthed girl in the house. I don't know how you can be so brave, I said. I'm not meek by any means, but I'd not stand up to a policeman with a stick, that's for sure. One person might not have the courage, Rose, but when there are hundreds, it's not so hard. Even if you get hurt or jailed, there are many to help. We even had the support of some of the most important women in New York. It's one thing to have poor working girls in a picket line, but when you have society, ladies, well, that's a news story. Gussie's cheeks were flushed with excitement. I've been rattling on, not giving you a chance to talk. What are your plans now that you won't be going back to the flower-making shop? She thought I had plans. I didn't have an idea in my head. I guess I need to find another place to work. That's just what I was thinking. You have some sewing skills, right? Your mother was a seamstress in Ireland. Well, yes, but I'm nowhere near as good as her. Do you know how to run a sewing machine? No, I've never... Don't worry. I can get a machine and some scrap material for you to practice on. Then, if you want, I'll talk to the foreman at work and see if he'll give you a job. Do you think I could learn fast enough to get a factory job? You know the answer to that question better than me, Rose. I had my doubts, but I wasn't about to turn down a job. There's just one other thing, I said. What's that? Well, I have nothing to wear. What you have on is fine, Gussie said. You don't have to be fashionable to work at the Triangle, although some of the girls spend most of their paychecks trying to look like fine ladies. It makes more sense to wear serviceable clothes. After you get your first pay, I can take you to some shops that have good clothes for reasonable prices. No, it's not that, I said when she finally took a breath. I have no coat. If the factory's a distance away, I'll be too cold walking with just a dress on. For heaven's sake, Rose, what happened to your coat? Did you leave it in the shop? Yes, I just ran. So not only does Moskovitz get your work for free, he gets a coat in the bargain. I nodded. We'll go back there first thing in the morning. We'll get your coat and your money. But you'll be late for work. Won't you get in trouble? One of the neighbors works on my floor. I'll have her tell the foreman I'll be late. Gussie grinned. Besides, I haven't had a good fight in a long time. 20. I stayed awake half the night worrying about being carted off to jail. Tuesday morning, I expressed my concerns to Gussie. We're just going back there to get your coat, Rose, and the pay that Mr. Moskovitz owes you. He can't have us arrested for that. All right. I could see why Gussie was so successful in the union. She had a way of convincing you to do things you feared. I wondered how many poor, unsuspecting girls she had talked into going on strike, when all they really wanted to do was stay working at their machines so they could bring money home to their families. Ma had always taught me to stay out of trouble. Now here I was, brazenly asking for it. Can I go? Maureen asked. No, Gussie said. We might have to leave quickly, and I don't want you to get hurt. Maureen's eyes widened. Hurt? Is Rose going to get hurt? Probably not, Gussie said. We didn't like the sound. Probably not. I said we wouldn't be arrested, Rose. We won't give him time for that. But how do I know how he'll react when we get there? I don't know the man. I don't need a coat that badly, I said. And as for the money, I'll get another job. Gussie put her hands on her hips and gave me a stern look that reminded me of Ma. I'm sure you will, Rose. And when that boss decides not to pay you, you'll run away and find another job, won't you? There are people running sweatshops all over the Lower East Side who would love to hire a meek little greenhorn like you. I stood up and faced her, but all I managed to say was, I'm not meek, in a voice so tremulous that it proved her point, not mine. Gussie pulled a woolen shawl from the back of her father's chair and wrapped it around my shoulders. You won't be such a mouse when I get through with you. Now, let's go show that man how tough you can be. Before I could speak, she had me out the door. She kept her arm around my shoulder, forcing me to keep going as we marched down the sidewalk. I half expected her to be waving a union banner in her other hand. My heart was in my throat, but I didn't dare protest. I knew I had to get a good deal stronger if I was to keep Maureen and me off the streets, and like it or not, Gussie was the perfect teacher. Still, I balked when we got to the building. I can't. I don't want to see that man again, Gussie. I feel sick to my stomach. Gussie gave me that look again. Then go over to the curb, be sick, and get it over with. I took a deep breath. No, it's all right. I'll do it. The shop is in the back. We go through here. I led the way through the hall of the front apartment building. But when we stood outside the door of the shop, my legs went weak. I dropped to my knees and vomited on the ground. This was getting to be a habit. Gussie knelt beside me and held back the lock of hair that had fallen into my face. When I was finished, she helped me to my feet and gestured for me to wipe a bit of vomit off my chin. You should kiss the old coot now. Might not be such a pleasant experience for him. I laughed in spite of myself, and Gussie in one motion rubbed my back and shoved me through the door. Mr. Moskovitz looked surprised. What do you want? You have no business in this shop. Tell him why you're here, Gussie whispered. I opened my mouth, but I could feel the bile rising in my throat. When Gussie saw my face, she spoke for me. She does indeed have business with you, Mr. Moskovitz. I swallowed the bitter liquid in my mouth and shivered. But when I saw the bandage on Mr. Moskovitz's nose where I had bitten him, I suddenly felt a strength I didn't know I had. I spotted my coat folded up on a chair and went to claim it. This belongs to me, I said. Then I walked right up to him and held out my hand. And I'm here for the money you owe me for the work I did. Mr. Moskovitz dismissed me with a wave of his hand. Take your ratty old coat, but I owe you nothing. You owe me for a day's work I did here in the shop and 3,000 stems I made at home. Mr. Moskovitz jutted out his chin. I pay nothing for shoddy work. I was aware that all eyes in the room were on me, but I didn't look at the other girls. The only sound was a soft rustle of paper petals. Mr. Moskovitz raised his hand as if to cuff me on the side of the face. Instead of shrinking back, I stepped forward, almost nose to nose with him. The lady with me is from the union. She says you have to pay me. Mr. Moskovitz stepped back. I couldn't tell if it was from my words or my stinking breath. Nonsense. This isn't a union shop. I moved in close again. I could see that, even with the early morning chill in the room, he had tiny beads of sweat on his forehead. It doesn't matter whether you're a union shop or not. There are laws, you know. Laws that say you can't take advantage of your workers. The room that had been so silent before now began to sizzle with whispers. I can have you arrested, I said. You know I'm speaking the truth. Your girls know it now too. I'm sure you've been cheating them as well as me. And maybe been wanting a few extra favors from some of them too, especially the young, pretty ones. I glanced over and saw Tessa. She raised her eyebrows at me. The buzz became louder now. Mr. Moskovitz pushed Gussie and me toward the door. He plunged his hand in his pocket and pulled out some bills. Take this and leave, he said, thrusting them into my hand. I don't ever want to see you again. Don't worry, you won't, I shouted over my shoulder as he slammed the door behind us. We could hear him yelling through the closed door. Girls, stop this nonsense and get back to work. There were some voices shouting back at him, but I couldn't make out the words. Gussie laughed. You've broken open a hornet's nest for that man. I hope he gets stung plenty. She looked at the bills in my hand. $3. That's a whole week's pay in some of these places. You turned out to be some fighter, Rose. I couldn't have done better myself. We ran and laughed all the way home. Maureen came out of our room to greet us when we burst into the apartment. Are you all right? Did that awful man hurt you? Gussie laughed. No, I think I'd say Rose hurt him instead. You hit him, Maureen gasped. I hugged her. No, silly. I just stood up to him, that's all. It felt good to be doing the yelling at someone else instead of taking it for a change. Your sister has real spunk, Maureen. We could use more like her in the union. I was only telling the truth, I said. Gussie smiled. Well, you might have exaggerated just a bit. About what? There's no doubt that Mr. Moskovitz should be arrested for what he does, but I'm afraid that won't happen. He was right about not being bound by union rules. He didn't have to pay you a cent. Well then, why did he give me all that money? He wanted to get you out of there quickly so you wouldn't give his girls any ideas. I didn't mean to lie, I said. Don't worry about it. Obviously, Mr. Moskovitz hasn't paid enough attention to the labor movement to understand his own rights. If one girl stands up to him, you did a good deed. Now, I have to get to work. I'll find out about getting you a job. Can you get me a job too? Maureen asked. I'm 12. That's old enough to work. You have to be 14 to be legal, Gussie said. Unfortunately, the shop owners hire some girls as young as 10. That's why they hide them in the elevator between floors when the inspectors come. Maureen's face brightened. See, Rose, I could work with you and Gussie. Oh no, Gussie said. I won't get a job for an underage worker. I don't approve of child labor. Neither would Ma, I said. She wants you in school, and that's exactly where you're going. I'll earn the money. I hate you both. Maureen went off into her room in a huff. Too bad you didn't have a door to slam, I said. Gussie laughed. The swish of a curtain just doesn't have the same dramatic effect, does it? She cut herself a slice of bread and a hunk of cheese, wrapped them in paper, and slipped them into her purse. You should get Maureen signed up for public school right away, Rose. I can see how that one could get herself in a lot of trouble if she had too much time on her hands. You're right about that, I said, surprised that Gussie had sized up Maureen so quickly. Maureen sulked after Gussie left, refusing to speak to me. That was fine with me. I could use some thinking time. I certainly wasn't about to drag her through the streets to find a school. We could go in the afternoon. I spent the morning mending the torn sleeve of my dress. Luckily, it was just a ripped seam, so it was an easy fix. Besides, it got my fingers back in the habit of sewing again. I wondered what it would be like to work in a big factory. How many girls did Gussie say worked there? Hundreds. I couldn't even imagine it. Still, it would be steady work if I could get it. And the conditions at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory must be fair and safe, or Gussie wouldn't be working there. As soon as I had the job, I planned to write to Ma and tell her how my luck had changed. 21.
$295.